Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Samach Beis is a continuation of a machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Chizda about what happens when you shech the carbon Pesach for correct people with a bris milah, but you have in mind that you're planning to do the zrika, the application of the blood to the walls of the mizbech. You're going to do that for the sake of other people who do not have a bris milah and are therefore impossible for the carbon itself. Now, there's two versions of what this machlokes is based on. We've already seen the first version. The Gemara is going to move on to the second version, but the Gemara will go back to analyze some of the proofs in the first version. So we're going to do the daf slightly out of order. We'll finish the Gemara's discussion first about the analysis of the first version, and then we'll go to the second version, which is Rav Ashi's. So now, in the first version, as part of our explanation of the machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Chizda, we quoted a brisa that has the following discussion, slightly independent, but it links. We can discuss it independently. The brisa there is asking, if you bring a carbon Pesach for a group of people, and some of those people have a bris milah and some do not. So the people who don't have a bris milah are pasul, of course. The question is, the fact that they're part of the group, does that pasul the carbon for the other ones or not? Meaning, some of the kizesim, some of the units of this carbon will be eaten or is intended to be eaten at the time of shechita by people who are pasul because they have a because they don't have a bris milah. Does that pasul the rest of the kizesim in the carbon that are intended to be eaten by people that are kosher? So the Gemara there, the brisa there, had said, well, it depends. Should we compare the psul of not having a bris milah to the psul of tumah, or should we compare it to the psul of having intent at the time of shechita to eat it in the wrong time? Some kizesim that you had intent to eat in the wrong time passes the entire carbon. Some kizesim that are intended for tumah don't pasul the rest of the carbon, or some that are tumah don't pasul the rest of the carbon. Where does carbon Pesach that is shechted for people without a bris milah, where does that fit in? Is that like tumah and therefore it doesn't pasul the rest of the carbon, or is that like chutzlas maneh and therefore it does pasul the rest of the carbon? The brisa had resolved it, but first the Gemara here asks, what kind of tumah are we talking about here? If you mean that some of the people that you shechted it for are tumah, so then how can you ask this question? That means that you're assuming that the halacha there is clear, that if you shechted it for some people which are tamei and some people aren't, it's kosher at least for the people that are not tamei. The only way you know that is because we have a Mishnah that says that. Well, that same Mishnah answers our question in the first place. It says that if some of the people have a bris milah and some do not have a bris milah, it's kosher for the people who don't have a bris milah. So why do you know the halacha of tumah and you don't know the halacha of bris milah? So it doesn't make sense. So the Gemara therefore says, must be we're not talking about where some of the people are tamei, we're talking about where some parts of the meat of the carbon became tamei. There we have an independent Mishnah elsewhere that teaches us that there the halacha is clear, that the parts of the carbon that are kosher are still good, you could eat those. And therefore partial tumah doesn't pasul the rest of it. And our question is, should I compare where part of the meat is intended to be eaten by people without a bris milah, should I compare that to that or not? The problem is when the Gemara when the brisa moves on and tries to resolve which one I'm supposed to compare it to tumah or to chutzlas maneh, it can't be talking about a situation where part of the meat actually became tamei. It has to be talking about where part of the people become tamei. How so? Because let's look at the two resolutions the Gemara has. First of all, the brisa there wants to say we should really compare bris milah to tumah, because both of these psulim don't apply in all carbonis. Only a carbon Pesach has a psul of bris milah, other carbonis don't, and a carbon Pesach doesn't have a psul of tumah, and only a carbon Pesach has a psul of tumah that tamei people cannot be part of a carbon Pesach. Other karbanos, a tamei person could send the carbon. Why not? So therefore, a milah and the milah psul and the tumah psul are very similar. But that's obviously talking about a psul of the people. A psul, and if some of the meat becomes tamei, there the halacha is not true that it's a unique halacha to carbon Pesach. By all karbanos, if part of the meat becomes tamei, that meat can't be eaten. So what do we mean when we say that if we're referring to the tumah of the meat, what do we mean when we say that the psul of bris milah is more comparable to the psul of tumah than it is to the psul of chutz lizmanai in the sense that they both only apply to Karban Pesach and not to other things. It's not true. So Gemara has two answers. The Gemara says, first of all, either you're right, where you hear when we bring this proof, we're not talking about the tumah of the meat, we're talking about the tumah of the people. Even though our original question was about the tumah of the meat, not the tumah of the people. But our answer, our proof is from the general concept of tumah. Even though it's a different type of tumah, it's not tumah of the meat, it's tumah of the people, but it's a general proof. The Gemara's second attempt is to say that no, there is actually a sense in which tumah of the meat is different for a Karban Pesach than it is for other karbanos. And therefore we mean to say that the psul of milah is similar to the psul of tumah of the meat, because both of them have a special halacha for Pesach that don't apply elsewhere. Tumah of milah only applies to Pesach, not anywhere else. Tumah of meat only applies to Karban Pesach in the sense that if the meat is tamei, but the chalev, the parts that go on the mizbeach, are tahar, so if it's Karban Pesach, the carbon is still puzzle, you can't bring it, because the Karban Pesach has to be eatable. It has to be edible by somebody, and here it's tummy, it can't be eaten, and therefore it's puzzle. By other karbanos, however, if the meat is tummy, but the part that goes in the mizbeach is tahar, then the carbon is not tummy. The carbon is not puzzle. You could still bring the carbon, you could finish it up, and you could put the blood on the mizbeach. There's nothing wrong with it, because at least the mizbeach part is okay. The eating part is bad. So therefore, there is a way in which these two are unique, different than other karbanos, and the comparison makes sense. Now the Gemara has the same question about the other comparison, which we say the Brisa there wants to say that maybe I should say that the psul of milah is more similar to the psul of chutz lizmanai in the sense that both of them have no exceptions. There's no situation in which a person that doesn't have a bris milah is allowed to partake of a Karban Pesach, and there's no situation in which a chutz lizmanai can be eaten, and it's not ipsul. Tumah is different though. Tumah has exceptions. When the entire congregation, when the tzibor is tamei, the psul doesn't apply. So Gemara says, but that again, that only makes sense if when we say tumah, we're talking about the psul of tumah of the people. The psul of tumah of the meat has no exceptions. So therefore, again, we're referring to the psul of tumah of the meat now, while in our original question we were referring to the psul of tumah of the people. So Gemara again says the same first answer. Could be you're right. We're just bringing a proof from the general concept of tumah, even though it's a different type of tumah. Or, no, there is a way in which the psul of tumah of a Karban Pesach does have exceptions to it, and therefore milah is more similar to chutz lizmanai. Where is there exception to the psul of tumah of a Karban Pesach? That's if the most of the congregation is tamei. Not only are they allowed to bring the Karban Pesach, they're also allowed to eat it. Because if they couldn't eat it, you couldn't bring it, and therefore the psul does have exceptions. The psul of tumah does have exceptions, and it makes sense to compare bris milah, the psul of not having a bris milah, to the psul of chutz lizmanai. Okay, that concludes the Gemara's discussion. Now let's discuss Rav Ashi's version of this machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Chisda. Rav Ashi says what they're arguing about is a slightly different issue. The case that they're arguing about is where you brought the Karban Pesach, you did the shechita. When you did the shechita, you had in mind that it should be for people which have a bris milah, they're okay, there's nothing wrong with them. And then you had in mind that you're going to do the zrika of the blood for people which do not have a bris milah. Now, so far it's the same as what we said before, except now Rav Ashi says these people which didn't have a bris milah, they aren't registered to the carbon. They're not part of the chabura. Now, the halacha that we're discussing is the psul of having people in mind which are not part of the chabura. That's the problem. We know that there's a psul that if you have in mind for people that are not part of the chabura, that's a problem. The question here is that those people who aren't part of the chabura don't have a bris milah, so they're not really qualified for the carbon altogether. Does the psul of having in mind to do the zrika for people that aren't part of the chabura, does that apply if those people are totally disqualified from the carbon because they don't have a bris milah? For other reasons, maybe the fact that they're so disqualified means I can have them in mind that I'm going to do the zrika for them, and the fact that they're not part of the chabura is not a psul because they're totally irrelevant. They don't even have a bris milah b'chlal. So they have this machlokes. Rabbah says the halacha is that you're right. It's not a problem because they have no bris milah. They're totally disqualified, and the fact that you had them in mind and they're not a part of the chabura, being not part of the chabura is not a problem if they're so disqualified. Rav Chisda says no. they're disqualified. They don't have a bris milah. That's not such a big issue, because you know what? They could qualify themselves. They could go get a bris milah, and then they'll be qualified. We say the concept of hoel. Since they could make themselves qualified by getting a bris milah, they do have some power from the fact that they could do it, and that makes them considered to be qualified to some extent now, and their qualifications mess things up for us, because now the psul of the fact that they're not part of the chabura is irrelevant, because they're not so disqualified otherwise. So Gemara says, you're telling me that Rav Chizda holds of the concept of hoel? He says you do get some power of the fact that you could do something, and Rabbah says you don't hold of hoel, but we see the opposite. We see the concept of hoel as it applies to cooking on Yom Tov. They say the opposite halachas. Over there, the case is where somebody cooks on Yom Tov after he's already eaten. He's not going to need any food anymore for the rest of Yom Tov, and it's therefore the cooking that he's doing is really for the week. According to Rabbah, we say hoel. We say since guests might come, and therefore it'll be needed, you do get the power, you get the strength of the fact that it could potentially be needed if guests will come, even though guests aren't coming, you don't plan on them coming. But since something potentially could happen, you get the power of that, and therefore it's not considered like you cooked it for during the week completely, it's considered like you cooked it for Yom Tov needs. Rav Chizda says no. Rav Chizda says there's no hoel. We don't say that. We say you cooked it for during the week and it's no good. So it's a contradiction. So the Gemara says Rabbah is not contradicting himself. Rabbah holds to the concept of hoel when there isn't anything you have to do to get to that stage where it's useful, where the power applies. You don't have to do anything else. If guests might show up, they'll show up. You don't have to do anything to make your cooking useful. Here, you got to go do a bris milah to make yourself applicable to the concept, to the idea of the Korban Pesach being known for you. That you have to do something, you don't get the power of something that you're separated from by an action. Now, Rav Chizda, though, Rav Chizda says is that we do say the concept of hoel, you could get a bris milah here. You know why? Because it's a chumrah. We're being stringent and we're saying you do get the problems created, but you do receive the chumras created by the fact that you are applicable to a carbon in the sense that you could do a bris milah and then you're applicable to the Korban Pesach, and therefore you will passel it even by dint of the fact that you weren't part of the chabura when the person had in mind and you shechted it for you. To say there's a leniency there, we don't tell. To say that the fact that you cooked on Yom Tov is not a problem because maybe people might come, then we're not going to use that as a leniency. Now, the Gemara questions this. The Gemara says, is it really true that Rav Chizda says hoel as a chumrah? The proof is from a machlokes between two Tanaim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, about what's the halacha if somebody brings a different carbon as a Korban Pesach in the Beis HaMikdash on Erev Pesach when a Korban Pesach is supposed to be brought. That's to say, let's say you just bring a shlamim, an animal which is designated as a shlamim, you bring it in the right time and place for a Korban Pesach. Is that puzzle or not? Or you bring a animal which was designated as a Korban Pesach, but it reverted to shlamim because there was a problem with the designation, which happens automatically when there's a psul there. Like, for example, you have a animal which is older than a year old, so it's puzzle to be a Korban Pesach, it reverts to a shlamim. And now that's a shlamim, you bring it in the time for Korban Pesach, is that puzzle or not? Now we can focus on the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. He says as follows. He says if you bring it in the time of a Korban Pesach, it's puzzle, clearly indicating that if you were to bring it in the time when it's not a Korban Pesach, but you're bringing it as a Korban Pesach, you're saying I'm bringing this animal as a Korban Pesach, but it was designated to be a shlamim, or it reverted to a shlamim, and you say I'm bringing it as a Korban Pesach, that's not a psul unless it's the time of Korban Pesach. If it's the wrong time, that's not a psul at all. So Gemara says, according to Rav Chizda, why not? We should say, since you could have brought it in the right time and it would be puzzle, so you should say l'chumra. Therefore, even when you're bringing it now in the wrong time, it should be puzzle also. Being in the right time is something you could potentially have done, and that is a psul. So you should get that potentiality even if you're bringing it in the wrong time, and it should be a psul. So Gemara says no, because the halacha about bringing a Korban Pesach, the halacha about bringing a different carbon as a Korban Pesach, or bringing a Korban Pesach as a different carbon, comes from a pasuk that says v'amartem zevach Pesach hu. It says that this is a Pesach, which teaches that that you can't bring a Korban Pesach as a different carbon, and you can't bring a different carbon as a Korban Pesach. That's where there's a psul. Therefore, those two psulim are linked. The only time we have a psul if you bring a different carbon as a Pesach is in the time where if you would bring a Pesach as a different carbon, you would have a psul. Now the halacha is that a Korban Pesach is allowed to be brought as a shlamim on any other time other than Erev Pesach. Only in the time when it could be a Pesach is there a psul if you bring it as a shlamim. But let's say it's after Erev Pesach, it's after the right time, you could bring a carbon Pesach as a shlamim. Even before Erev Pesach, you could bring a carbon Pesach as a shlamim. There's no problem there. Therefore, there's no problem if you bring a carbon shlamim as a Pesach, as long as it's not the time. It's learned out specifically from this pasuk, and therefore we have a specific source that eliminates the concept of a hoil here, and that's why we don't say that. Okay, now the Gemara quotes an incident, which leads back to a discussion we had earlier. The Gemara says that Rab Simloi came to Rav Yechon and he said, I want you to teach me Sefer Yochsin. That's a book of Midrashim on the Sefer Ksuvim called Divrei Hayamim. So he said, where are you from? So he said, I'm from Lud. He said, where do you live now? He said, I live in Naharda. So he said, listen, we don't teach Sefer Yochsin, not to people from Lud, not to people from Naharda, certainly not to you, because you're from both places. Now, some discussion here what the issue was. Seems that there are controversial Yochsin, there are controversial discussions of lineage in the Sefer Divrei Hayamim, and people from Lud and Naharda were involved in the controversy, and therefore they didn't want them to learn this medrash. So the Gemara says that he pressured him anyway. Rav Simloi pressured Rav Yechon until he gave in. So Rav Simloi said, okay, let's take 3 months, we'll go through the whole thing. So Rabbi Yechanan picked up a clump of earth and he threw it at him as if to say, that's ridiculous, you can't do it in 3 months. And he says, Beruria, who was the wife of Rabbi Meir and the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Teradyon, who was so expert at learning that she could learn 300 halachas from 300 rabbanim in 1 day, still she couldn't finish Sefer Yochsin and understand it in less than 3 years. You think you're going to learn it in 3 months? Please. So the Gemara says that he asked him, when they finished and he was on the way out, Rav Simloi asked Rabbi Yechanan, what is the difference between the psul of Shaloi Lishmai and Lishmai to the psul of L'Shem Eichlin and Shaloi L'Shem Eichlin? That means as follows. We've seen in our Mishnah that a carbon Pesach, which is brought for the sake of Pesach and with intent, is brought, again, for the intent of being a carbon Pesach and for the intent to bring a different carbon. We had a machlokes earlier if that's different avodos or if it's the same avodah, but it's brought for two conflicting intents. There we said that it's puzzle. But if it's brought for two different groups of eaters, some people who could eat it and some people who can't eat it, there it's kosher. Having in mind that it's also for people who can't eat it doesn't puzzle it, but having in mind that it's also for a different type of carbon does puzzle it. What's the difference? So Rabbi Yechon says there's 4 differences, and I'll tell them to you because I see your Talmud Chacham, and they are as follows. The first difference is that if you have in mind that the carbon Pesach should also be a different carbon, that's a psul in the carbon itself. If you just have in mind that it should be for other people, that's a psul in the eaters. It's not a psul in the carbon itself. Second difference is the psul of that you had in mind for a different carbon, that's not a visible psul. You can't set it aside and look at it and see where the psul is. The psul of different eaters, you could see these people can't eat it and they're involved, so you could set the psul part aside. Third difference is the psul of different eaters only applies in the shchita. It doesn't apply in the zrika, while the psul of wrong carbon applies in all 4 main avodos. And the fourth difference is that the psul of wrong eaters only applies to a carbon Pesach, while the psul of wrong carbon applies to all types of karbanos tzibor. The Rishonim point out applies to all karbanos, not only tzibor, and they ask why we say tzibor specifically. Now the Gemara points out that these 4 reasons are really 3 reasons, because in what sense is wrong intent for carbon? What sense is that a psul in the guf of the carbon itself, in the animal itself? There's nothing wrong with the animal. The problem is the intent that you had when you shechted it, or did the other avodas for it. The Gemara says what we mean to say is that it's not separable. You can't look at it and see it outside the carbon itself. It's really the same as saying the second reason, that the psul of wrong carbon is not visible, you can't set it aside, while the psul of wrong eaters is visible, and you can set that aside. Now the Gemara goes back briefly to the discussion of Sefer Yochsin. The Gemara says that Rav Mari bar Rav Yudah said that the Sefer Yochsin was hidden. It was removed, possibly because of these controversial things in it. From that day, the Chachamim became weak because there was a tremendous amount of drashas, of Torah expositions in there that they lost because the Sefer was hidden. he says that there are a couple of psukim in Sefer Divrei Hayamim that describe the sons of somebody named Eitzel. So it starts with the first pasuk in the topic starts with the word Eitzel, and then the last pasuk ends with the word Eitzel. The Gemara says even just this, from Eitzel to Eitzel, which is just really names, has 400 camel loads of drushas that you get out of that.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.